Hello, and thank you for listening to our latest edition of the Grim Wisdom Podcast. The idea, as always, is we're going to give you some wisdom, and it's going to depress you. With me today is my father, Gary Metz, Sr. Sorry I couldn't get anyone better, but but we've got some good things to talk about today.
Yeah, that's a disappointment.
I know. Well, just as I'm a disappointment to you, so too can you be a disappointment to my listeners.
Yeah, but do you remember that Mark Twain quote you have? Wasn't Mark Twain? It says,
Oh, yeah.
When I was like, how's that go?
Yeah, it says, when I was 13, I couldn't believe that anyone on earth could be as ignorant as my old man. But when I was 21, I was amazed by how much he learned in only 8 years.
Yeah.
That's funny because it's true. So, my dad's out here visiting from Oregon, so that's why he's on today and not some other day. And we're going to be talking about a few different things. So I thought, first of all, Dad wanted to tell us about Medicare or the healthcare system in this country and how in a post-Obamacare world, it's still really not working very well for a lot of people. And so why don't you tell us about that, Dad?
Well, that isn't exactly what I wanted to talk about. What I really wanted to talk about was how Bernie should be doing a better job trying to sell Medicare for all because of the enormously beneficial effects it would have for businesses, in particular small businesses. As a small business, when I had a small business, it was not unusual every year to have our health insurance company either double our rates or drop us because we were too small a group or whatever. And the rules and regulations about, I want to read something here that I just did because this applies to this one. It says, beginning January 1st, 2014, employers with 50 or more employees will be required to offer coverage. Okay? That's part of Obamacare. Here are the details. Assess employers with 50 or more employees that do not offer coverage and have at least one full-time employee who receives a premium tax credit, a fee of $2,000 per full-time employee, excluding the first 30 employees from the assessment. Employers with more than 50 employees that offer coverage but have at least one full-time employee receiving a premium tax credit will pay the lesser of $3,000 for each employee receiving a premium credit, or $2,000 for each full-time employee, excluding the first 30 employees from the assessment. We'll also require employers that offer coverage to their employees to provide free choice vouchers to employees with incomes less than 400% FPL, whose share of the premium exceeds 8% but is less than 9.8% of their income, and who choose to enroll in a plan in the exchange. The voucher amount is equal to what the employer would have paid to provide coverage to the employee under the employer's plan and will be used to offset the premium cost for the plan in which the employee is enrolled. Employers providing free choice vouchers will not be subject to penalties for employees that receive premium credits in the exchange. Require employers with more than 200 employees to automatically enroll employees into health insurance plans offered by the employer. Employees may opt out of coverage. Okay, now, did anybody understand that?
I think I got about half of it.
Yeah, nobody can understand that. You have to spend the next probably day figuring out what a premium tax credit and what a full-time employee is, and counting the number of employees that you might have that meet these criteria of being incomes less than 400 of the FPL. And I mean, it would take, you'd hire somebody probably to tell you whether you had to do it, because I don't think a normal employer would want to waste his time trying to figure out this bullshit, Well,
I think...
Okay, so here I'm a small employer, right? and I have 49 employees. I'm not going to hire a 50th employee because then I'll have to deal with all this bullshit. So, why
you
would I
might,
have
but
to
you'll-
worry?
You might, but you'll make him a contractor, so you don't have to.
Well, I could do that too, but wouldn't it be nice? And there's no guarantee on any of these things. And myself, as a private employer, experienced this as well. That your premiums or whatever are not going to change and change drastically anytime, or that things will or will not be covered. So the whole thing about having, if it's taken just as like a payroll tax just like Medicare is now, if we had Medicare for all, I have a fixed cost that I know is going to be taken, that I'm going to pay out of each employee's check, and he's going to pay some too, and everybody's going to be covered, and everybody in their family is going to be covered. I'm going to be covered. I mean, it just makes so much more sense. And it's a fixed cost, and maybe Congress eventually will sometime or another change the rates or whatever it is. But even so, it's not like that's done just at the whim of some insurance company because their profitability isn't high enough, or their CEO wants to take another $10 million bonus.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing in the.
Not only that, okay, there's so many other reasons why a small business and a large business too. If I were a GM and I have 200,000 employees and I knew exactly what my fixed cost was for health insurance, I could build that right in. I'd never have to worry. I mean, that's a big difference. And I don't have to hire a team of lawyers to figure out whether or not I'm covering the people and I'm covering all the options that they have to cover, etc. I mean, it's just, to me, it's a no-brainer that any company other than a health insurance company should be 100% behind Medicare for all.
Well, I think you make a good point, but I think you're really still not getting the totality of the problem because.
Oh, another thing is, how do we define part-time and full-time employees? Okay? As of now, suppose I'm a small business and I have employees that are part-time and I want to start having them work more. Well, unless I'm ready to provide health coverage for everybody, let's just say I'm a small place, like I have 5 employees or something like that, I mean, Walmart gets around this whole thing by having nobody who works more than 30 hours a week, I mean, that's ridiculous. And they can probably do that. But as a small business employer, you may want some of your good employees to work full time and not have to be on the hook for health insurance for everybody because you're small. But if they had Medicare for all, they'd be covered automatically. Everybody that came to work for you would be covered. And it would be a fixed cost that's all you had to pay. That extra 2 or 3% that both you and the employee would pay out of their paycheck.
Well, I think due to the number of small businesses in that range, though, is you're talking about a specific series of insanities in the law where if you're going from 49 to 50 full-time employees,
right,
however you define that. But the vast majority of small businesses are one person or 2 people, right?
So, well, they're less than 10, let's say.
Right, less than 10. So
right, I'll say that.
So the
and most of the time you can't even get insurance. My experience was with less than 10 because you're not a group. You're not big enough to get
right,
group rates. What you have to do is you have to pay rates that are based basically on your individual employees. And I even had insurance companies that would only insure us when we had less than 10 people, 10 or less, that forced everybody to have a physical before they would
insure them.
They would insure them.
Yeah. Well, that's to some degree gone away. I mean, the exchanges are available to people in there, but there's no assistance with the costs, and so what you end up doing is because you're being hit with the stick on the back end, where if you don't get the insurance, the penalty is significant. You end up getting junk insurance that doesn't cover very much. I've had the bronze plan before, right? And the bronze plan, it's better to have the bronze plan than nothing, because if you were in a catastrophic situation, in theory, a bronze plan will actually cover you. In practice, I would want to talk to somebody who had had a catastrophic injury and had bronze insurance coverage to see if
But
the
if you had
insurance company
Medicare
really
for all,
paid.
everybody has the same.
This would be, I know, this would all be irrelevant. Yeah.
Totally irrelevant if we had something like Medicare for all.
But you got to look at all
Also,
the.
what about this? When I had it, and I think this is definitely still true, even for small or even for large, once you're in a group, they kind of even things out if you have a big enough group. But in a small group, if you want to hire a guy that's, say, 50 or 55, you're going to have to pay more for his health insurance than you are for somebody that maybe is inexperienced. So it's a penalty, kind of a disincentive for hiring people that have experience and are older.
Yeah.
There's a definite disincentive, and that shouldn't be either. I mean, if I want to hire a person who has just the right kind of experience and many years of it and can really be a benefit to my company, I shouldn't be faced with a disincentive of health insurance.
Well, and it's interesting because age discrimination, it's one of those things that's against the law but happens routinely.
Well, no, it is. I mean, that's the way health insurance works.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're 60 and try and buy health insurance, you're going to pay a hell of a lot more.
You're going to pay a hell of a lot more, right. But I'm saying, as an employer, you're not supposed to be allowed to take into account the age of the person, the applicant. But in practice, of course, you have to. Right, right. And people listening can't see, but he's rolling his eyes. Yeah, I mean, it's the same as racism, which we've talked about in previous podcasts, where the Supreme Court upheld that it's totally okay for you to strike jurors just because they're black. It's totally okay for you to engineer an all-white jury. That's all right, as long as you say it wasn't because of their race, right? Mm-hmm. As long, in fact, the Supreme Court upheld striking a juror because of his haircut was okay, as long as it wasn't racist.
Right.
And so even the most idiotic, and they can get pretty idiotic, but even the most idiotic prosecutor is smart enough to come up with some excuse other than race for striking every black person from a jury.
Well, don't they also have the right to just have like a number of, I can get rid of them just because I want to get rid of them?
Well, they have peremptory strikes, but like I said, you're not allowed to peremptorily strike people based on the criteria of
I don't
race.
think you have to have a criteria. I ought to just say, I don't want that juror.
Well, I'm saying, I mean, if you've seen Law and Order and you've seen various movies, they oversimplify the process a bit. It's still against the law. According to the letter of the law, you're not allowed to do that based on racial criteria. You can't base it, you can strike them for any reason at all except race, right? So you just have to come up with a different reason. You have to say,
you have a beard, so I wouldn't want you.
Right, exactly. This guy has a beard, this guy, he looks shifty, whatever. This guy's shirt is too red. Whatever. It doesn't matter what the pretext is.
But I didn't think you even had to have that. I thought you could just say out and out, I don't want that person.
Effectively, that's been the effect of all of these court decisions is you can just say that, and if anybody ever asks you, hey, was race a determining criteria in the decision?
You always say no.
You always say no.
Right.
So, yeah, you always just say no. So as long as you don't explicitly do it for race, then it's not a race discrimination. And obviously, we don't want to minimize the fact that racism is tremendously unjust. But on the other hand, age discrimination is also illegal in hiring, but it's quite routine because of situations like this.
Like health
we're
insurance.
Talking about where, the employer is, if I hire these two employees, if I hire this green kid out of high school or out of college, they're going to be hungry, they're going to accept less pay, older person, more likely to have health issues, more expensive health insurance.
Whether they have health issues or not, they're going to be charged more for health.
They're going to be charged more for health insurance regardless, yeah. So
we had guys take physicals, and it didn't really matter. They were 50. Oh, and one guy was 50 or whatever it was, maybe even into his 50, 55, and he'd been a smoker when he was younger.
Oh, yeah.
But he'd quit. Well, that guy was a baddie. He was definitely an out-and-out,
a smoker, yeah. No, I know.
We kept him, but we had to pay for his health insurance.
When I was applying for health insurance when I first got to Rhode Island, I smoked a few cigars in college.
But you told somebody about it?
Yeah, I screwed up.
What an idiot!
It had been 5 years since I'd smoked one cigar, right? And they said, "Well, you're still a smoker, but good news, we'll drop that smoker rating in a year because the time frame And I'm like, I understand that if you were a chronic smoker, right, for 20 years and then you quit, your body doesn't ever completely recover from being a 20-year smoker. But I don't think that my health is going to be permanently impacted because I had a cigar in college.
Well,
but
you never want to say yes to those questions.
I mean, it's my fault. Now I know better. Now, whenever dealing with corporate America, I tell them what they want to hear. Always. That's
It's like when I just went through the customs coming back here, right?
yeah.
Are you bringing any, contraband subject?
Right. Are there any explosives in your baggage? Gee, what's the right answer to this? Are you a terrorist?
Yeah, right.
But I want to, since the point of the
Or like-
podcast. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, when I was a security officer for my company, I had to get investigated by the FBI or whatever it was, right? But we'd have guys that we would hire, and they'd be going to work on secret jobs.
Right. They'd require security clearance.
Right. And they'd ask those silly questions like, are you now or have you ever been the agents of a foreign country?
What's the right answer to that
What's
question?
the
I
right
wonder
answer
what
to-
they're going for there. Yeah. Not to mention they used to ask the questions. Now they just deny you and you don't ever find out the reason because then you can never have basis to sue. But they used to ask questions like, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Oh, yeah.
Have you read Karl Marx? Have you ever expressed any view that might be in the slightest bit sympathetic to...
Well, and then they have a list of countries that have you ever visited these countries?
Right. So, but
Like
getting...
North Korea or Cuba.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
Have you ever visited these countries that it's illegal to visit?
Yeah, right.
So getting back to healthcare, though, one of the things that you think, oh well, the problem is greedy insurance companies, and maybe at one point it was, but now there are so many interlocking pieces to this infernal machine of American healthcare. I mean, think pharmaceutical companies, right? They come out with a new drug, and it's way more expensive, and it's no more effective
Right.
than existing generics.
Well, all
right?
they have to do is change one little, to get a patent on a new drug, you take an existing drug,
And you just change the molecule
change
slightly.
one carbon atom or one hydrogen
Right.
atom, and you have the same total effect.
Yeah, because the
And
effect of the
it's a
molecule,
new drug, and so you get to patent it. You get another whatever it is, 17 years
Right.
with no
right?
no.
To break it down, I think a good analogy would be: imagine you had a shovel, right, and you patented the shovels, and now your shovel patent was expiring, right, and then you said, but we're going to create an entirely new patent for an entirely new device, and it looks the same. It's the same construction, it's the same in every way, except the end of the shovel is half an inch longer. Right?
Yeah, right.
And then the regulatory agencies that's not a shovel, right? Patents expire on a shovel, but on this new thing that's, you've
Right.
called something else,
Right.
new patent. And essentially at the molecular level, that's what's happening with a lot of these drugs. But that's what I'm getting at is, so the pharmaceutical company, they make a bunch of money off of selling new brand name drugs. Well, oftentimes, increasingly, and it's not as if they pay for their own R&D either, like a tremendous
no, they don't.
amount
Most of it comes from the National Health Institute
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
So the classical defense of, they need their profits to pay for research is bunk, because we
Or-
pay for the research.
Or it's a drug that they're only changing a minor thing in that's already been covered.
Right.
So
Right.
it costs them nothing for research and development.
Right. So the pharmaceutical company gets a hot new drug, and they need everyone to take the hot new drug and to get off the generics, right?
Right.
So what do? Well, they hire a bunch of former cheerleaders to go around and tell all the doctors how great the drug is and buy them steak dinners.
Buy them dinners.
Right.
Take them to Hawaii for conferences.
Right?
They do
And
all
in,
that stuff.
In some states it is
Pay
still
for their
legal.
family.
In some states it is still legal, although this has been curtailed in many states. But in some states it is still legal for the company to directly compensate the doctor
Yeah.
for prescriptions written for their new drug.
Right.
Right? So, which obvious conflict of interest. So the issue is doctors, they spend all their time treating patients.
By the way, I had an interesting thing on the Bruce that I was just on. We had this guy, Dr. Sam, I forget what his last name is, but they called him Dr. Sam. But anyhow, he talked about the history of medicine and all that, plagues in the Middle Ages and bleeding people and all that stuff. But one of the
we're
interesting
so much
ones
more civilized now.
was
We bleed people with paper.
Things That Glow. It was the title of it. And it was about Marie Curie, Madame Curie, discovering radium, and then suddenly radium became, and radioactive substances became a cure-all for everything.
Yep.
They became a cure-all for everything. Let's see, there was this guy, and he made millions. He took it himself, so eventually it killed him too.
Yeah.
Okay. But he paid he would give out these vials, and it was like a liquid, and you take a couple drops in your orange juice or whatever it is, right? And it was radium, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, some highly radioactive substance, and it cost him like 5 cents to manufacture them. He was selling them for $5 a vial,
Mm-hmm.
and he was giving the doctors that prescribed it got like 25 cents a vial for prescribing it.
Yeah.
And that was a big business.
Well, that's a piece of grim wisdom that you've said for a number of years is marketing beats everything.
Marketing beats everything.
So on radium, we could talk about the history of radioactive materials.
Well, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk about health, about paying kickbacks to doctors.
Kickbacks to doctors, right? So,
But that was a good example.
I think that is a good example because it's poison.
It is.
Kicking back to the doctor to prescribe poison, and they do it.
And
right?
they do it.
So not all the doctors, but enough of them. Right?
Yeah.
So the same thing happens with modern. So first, you got the insurance companies. Obviously, the insurance companies are going to regulate their business model out of existence. So obviously, they're going to fight you to death. They're going to fight you tooth and nail.
Right.
Right, on healthcare reform. But it's not just them, it's the pharmaceutical companies because
Sure.
when the federal government, in Medicare, they don't just prescribe you the drug that's the new hotness that they're marketed to. There are people that sit around figuring out what drugs are good for certain conditions, which doctors should have, right, access to those people who help them make those decisions because doctors don't have time to keep up on the latest information because they're treating patients.
Exactly.
But so if you have a national healthcare system that works, then you have that. But then that threatens the entire business model of pharmaceutical companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
That threatens private doctors who have gotten fat and happy off of this. You go over to Great Britain and they only make $300,000, right? But they don't have to borrow $300,000 to go to medical school in Great Britain either, right? So here in America, you borrow $300,000. That's not an exaggeration, by the way. I've seen those. I've seen people with those bills. And
heck, it cost $100,000 just to go to. I don't know how much Patty's son owes, but he owes tens of thousands of dollars still on his loan to go to Georgia Tech to get a degree in construction engineering or something like that.
Yeah, and so when you're a doctor and you have this $300,000 loan, well, you have to get paid very well in order to ever hope to pay it off.
Well, not only that, but if you want to start a practice of your own, you got to have a lot of capital because you have to hire a bunch of people to take care of filling out all the forms.
Mm-hmm. So you've got all of these moving parts that are entrenched in the system and at the end of the rainbow for the doctor is you have your own practice, you're making millions of dollars a year, or you work for somebody else and you're still making a fortune, right? So you have those.
I don't think it's unreasonable for doctors to make a reasonable salary, a reasonable income.
They make $300,000, or at least the senior doctors do, which is interesting too, because I saw this is another problem with this modern world of ours. I saw some news coverage on PBS about the doctor strike in Great Britain, and the news covered the details of the strike without ever once mentioning what the workers' demands were or why they were striking. And I'm like, the only thing I can do is assume what's going on here because all that we got was like one sentence in this 20-minute report about the doctor strike and how it was causing lines and the doctors felt that they had no choice and blah blah blah. I got one sentence about had something to do with shifts on Saturdays, and it's only the junior doctors who are striking. So I can only conclude that there's some big disconnect between how the senior doctors, the people with tenure, are being treated as opposed to the junior doctors, where they get a much cushier deal, but they do the same work. Right? That's the only conclusion I can draw, and that's a complete assumption. But our news media, even PBS, is supposed to be objective.
Well, that's a whole nother.
They didn't cover it at all, and so. And
what I want to talk about is how Medicare for All is good for business.
Well, I think Medicare for All is great for business if you're not in a related field. But that's a big percentage of the American economy,
Yeah, medical stuff is, but Yeah, that's because we've shipped every other job over to China. Or
Well,
wherever.
be that as it may, the point is you're saying that Medicare for all is good for business. I agree.
But you know
think,
what?
Not to mention, what kind of a society we want to have, where we
50
actually care for our citizens.
I
or not.
don't know what the number is, but it's at least 50% of all businesses in America are small businesses.
Oh yeah, way more. Yeah,
And those businesses would all benefit
yeah.
from Medicare for all.
Well, unless
'Cause
they were
they're not-
small doctor practices, which I've mentioned. Because there
Yeah, but
are
even
medical
a small
practices.
doctor's practice might benefit because then they have one insurer, one place to go. They know what's going to happen.
It's true. It's true. They might ultimately benefit, but they're not going to see that until the end.
Well,
They'll
some do.
probably fight you.
There are some doctors that do. In Oregon, for example, we had a ballot measure about 5 years ago, and it was to get health care for everybody. And it was sponsored by doctors and nurses.
Yeah, here in Rhode Island, you talk to doctors and nurses. Most of the people that at least got involved in that profession, they didn't want to become. They don't want to become malicious quacks prescribing radioactive
No, they
tinctures. They wanted to help people get healthy.
Well,
But
and they also want to make a decent wage, and they want to have a secure job.
Right.
And that's true.
That's pretty
They'll
much what
have
everybody
that.
wants. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the point is that those people aren't. When you have a system that rewards the scumbags,
Right.
the crap floats to the top, right? And so
right.
you see this handful of doctors that's against it also happens to be the most wealthy and the most complicit
Right.
subset of doctors, and that's not a coincidence. Obviously doctors are gonna, back in the 50s, they had your doctor endorses these cigarettes because it cleans out your lungs.
That's right. That's
so,
right.
And I'm sure most doctors, even at the time, were like, endorse cigarettes, whatever. But those who would prescribe it would get kickbacks,
Right.
and they'd prosper. And so I don't think most of them want to be quacks, but there's a few at the top who have money, and yeah, they'll spend their money, they'll fight you, as will the pharmaceutical companies, as will the
I wonder
insurance
how
companies.
hospitals would come out in it, because hospitals probably would be. It probably wouldn't matter to them, and hospitals, those are a lot of big businesses too. Nowadays, most hospitals are run by a conglomerate, basically.
Yeah.
They have hospitals all over the country, But then
Well, I think they'd
they
fight
would have
you.
guaranteed
I
payments.
think they'd fight you because they.
They wouldn't have to worry about unpaid.
It's
things.
true, but then Medicare would do what it does, which is to negotiate rates.
Right.
So if you want to charge $100,000 to set a leg, then there's nothing that anyone can do to say boo about that.
Right.
The insurance company doesn't
Oh
negotiate
no,
hard.
that's not true. Insurance company will pay what they'll pay. My doctor, my dermatologist, was having a problem with my insurance company because they were not paying him. I mean, they were paying him peanuts. It was like for a procedure where he removed, my basal cell carcinoma and all that stuff. They were paying him like $200, and I would spend 2 hours in his office. And he said, I used to work for a large dermatology practice, and that same procedure, they'd get paid like $1,000, and they were only going to pay him $200. And he said, he asked me to write a letter to him and say, what a great doctor he was and all that stuff. And I don't know I'm not on that insurance anymore because now I'm on Medicare. All right. Mm-hmm. But I mean, he's a great doctor. He wants to do right. He says, even if I only he says, I don't know what they're going to do. I probably will, whatever happens, I'm not going to charge you anymore because, you're one of my patients, have been my patient, and I'm going to keep you that way. And I said, that's great. But, they do definitely limit the payments to the doctors and to the hospitals.
They do.
Based on whatever criteria they happen to have at the moment. And one of the things that I found too is when you contest it and you call in and talk to somebody, those people, first of all, most of them don't have that much training.
No.
They don't know what they're talking
don't.
about. They don't know if this procedure is good or bad or
They just know
different.
that they're compensated based on how many claims they fight off.
Right. So
It's not really changed in many meaningful respects from what it was before Obamacare. But then too, we have another here in Rhode Island. To bring it back more locally, there's a birthing center up in the Pawtucket, North Providence area, Memorial Hospital, I think it is. And I haven't been following the story. One of our previous guests, David Norton, though, he's working hard on it because they want to close the birthing center because birthing just isn't profitable enough, and so they want to replace it with a new knee replacement lab because knee replacements are big money.
Right.
Right. And so it's not as if hospitals don't.
We're going from people that are just being born to people that are about ready to die.
Exactly. But who has all the money?
The people that are about ready to die.
Right. And so that's the ones that you want. That's the ones that you want to cover. You know, that's the market you want to get. Whereas, imagine imagine, I know this is such a radical notion. Imagine if we just placed hospitals where they could service patients, and we had a system to make sure that nobody went underserved. What a radical thought, right?
Well, you're talking about that, but one of the problems that I hear against Medicare for all and Obamacare too is, well, sure, now you can get insurance, but you can't find any doctors that'll take you. Okay?
Yes, it's true.
I say,
But you have to
how
go
is
to your
that
insurance
different?
company.
How is
Yeah.
that different than it was before?
It was the same.
It was the same. It was exactly the same.
It's
because
absolutely the same.
It hasn't changed. It hasn't gotten better. It may have gotten marginally worse because more people now do have some sort of coverage.
Right, and so those few doctors who were accepting patients, they fill
Right,
up more quickly.
right,
Yeah.
right.
It might have gotten worse, but it was still always a problem.
Always a problem.
Always a problem. You couldn't just go into any random healthcare facility and get care without having to wonder, is this going to bankrupt me? Am I going to be required to file for bankruptcy because this isn't one of my PPO approved providers?
Exactly.
Right?
I'm out of network.
Yeah, out
And
of
of course, those change all the time.
And the networks aren't even geographical. It's
Oh,
not
heavens
even
no.
like you have to go within this region. No, it's you have to go to this subset of doctors in this region that we've pre-approved under your plan. You know,
So
and if you
not
go to
only
another
with
doctor,
Medicare-
and if you go to another doctor and you say, "Hey, what is this going to cost me?" They'll say, "I don't know."
Not only so Medicare would eliminate this
You
PPO,
make all this crap. Yeah,
PPOs and all that stuff, Medicare for all. So not only would it be better for business, it'd be better obviously for the patients, for people.
yeah. And I think you
And,
could also make.
you could cover all children. Children are covered now under the separate child thing, right?
They can be in states that refuse the expansion. There are still uncovered children.
Well, if there was Medicare for all, children would be covered
Children will be covered.
as soon as they're born.
Right.
Yeah.
But so let's, and we could talk about what kind of society you even want to have. You want to have a society that just builds bombs and sells them to Saudi Arabia? That's your business model? Or do
That's
you want
our
to be a
business.
society that
That's-
takes care of its citizens, right?
That's the business of America.
We're
is-
arms dealers.
is
We're
arms.
arms dealers and
Right.
mercenaries, right? But
Right.
we could talk about that. But one of the things that's very frustrating as a Bernie supporter, and understand there's a lot of people who are way more fanatic or energized about Bernie than me. It's my feeling that even Bernie's reforms don't go as far as I'd like them to, but he certainly, of any candidate in this race, he's the only one that offers anything resembling hope for the future.
It's true.
I would say.
It's true.
Excuse me. So I hear this argument
Maybe
from
you
all.
need to see a doctor.
I can't afford to see a doctor.
Go ahead.
So I hear this argument all the time. Oh, well, Bernie's proposals aren't realistic or he can't get them through Congress. And it's like,
If you don't ask for it, you'll never get it.
right, what's better, a slim hope or none at all,
Right.
right? Because, Bernie probably won't be able, with the Congress we have now, Bernie won't be able to get any of this stuff through. So we would need a
You
second
don't need to
miracle.
see a doctor.
We would need a second miracle in order to have a Congress that was willing to go along with this stuff. But hey, let's get the first miracle done first, right?
Yeah,
and then we'll work
exactly.
on the second miracle
Right.
to give us the actual result we need. Bernie wants to impose a carbon tax. Well, Earth desperately needs us to impose a carbon tax. We need a carbon tax really badly, right? And so people say, oh, it's not practical with the Congress. Yeah, the Congress has been bought and sold by a variety of companies, including oil companies.
Right.
And oil companies don't want a carbon tax. Energy companies don't want a carbon tax. So, yeah, it's going to be impossible with the legislature or the Congress we have now to get that done. But we need it. We have to try. We have to go for whatever hope we can get on that. And I know for damn sure Hillary's not going to do a single thing about a carbon tax, right?
Nope.
Or like on stock trades. I've talked about, obviously, financial services is the industry I'm sort of unwillingly tied to for employment now. But there is, right now in the markets today, I mean, I must field quite a few calls a month where people are upset because they didn't get their price, even though the market passed their price for their stock, right? And I have to explain to them, look, man, in this day and age, there are companies that pay millions of dollars to locate their servers a block closer to the exchange.
So they'll get there a nanosecond fast.
Right, because the speed of light isn't fast enough for these freaking algorithms to trade, right? And so these algorithms are always sitting ahead of you, and they're just extracting value. They provide nothing of use to anyone. They simply siphon off value from the stock markets. It has nothing to do with investing in the sense of providing capital to finance.
No, they don't do that.
Constructions, they don't do that. They just vampire. They're only parasites, right? And increasingly, the entire business model of Wall Street is just looking for new things. Wall Street, thank you. Is just looking for new things to parasitize, right? Open up a new market, privatize everything, buy it on the cheap, sell it for higher. Don't run anything. Don't manage anything. Don't produce anything. Right? All you do is parasitize. All you do is take advantage of these little loopholes. Right?
Right.
And I talked a lot about this a few years ago when Mitt Romney was running for office because
Bain Capital.
Yeah, because Bain Capital, they executed. Everybody thinks, here in America we have this ethic that says if you're rich you must be smart. But Bain Capital executed a very simple exploit to the tax code that really anybody could take advantage of if they had a Rolodex full of connections with $100 million total, right? It's very simple. See, debt repayment is treated more favorably in the tax code than dividends, right? So Bain Capital would move into a company, they'd get them to bulk up their balance sheet with a bunch of debt, so that the company could buy out Bain Capital's new equity shares, right? And so that would make their cash flow look more reasonable because the repayment of the debt was treated more favorably than the dividends that they had been paying, right? So Bain Capital is just vampirizing off of that difference, that exploit in the tax code, right? And then on top of that, they do everything they could to break the unions to lower labor costs in the short run because they wanted to dump the company as soon as possible, after they did this. Right. So like in passing, they'd try to break the unions, they'd try to lay off the workers so that the labor costs look lower on paper for that quarter. Because if you don't have enough people for the company to be sustainable, that effect won't be felt for several quarters to come. Right. But if this quarter we fire half the staff and the rest of them are terrified and working twice as hard, this quarter we look profitable. And this is the quarter I'm going to sell the company. Right. And so you don't have to be a genius who went to business school to understand that or even really to implement it. Right. All you have to do is have a Rolodex full of rich jerk-offs, right, to finance this sort of swindle, right? And so...
Is that a technical term?
Jerk-offs?
Yeah.
Right.
What if they're not jerk-offs? What if they're just rich?
I think it's a safe bet that most people jerk off, so... I think we're all jerk-offs.
I think that's a different subject altogether.
Maybe we'll cut this part from the final podcast. Or maybe we'll leave it in. I don't know. I'll have to decide whether the joke is worth the vulgarity. But anyway. So the point is, we desperately need a tax on stock trades because...
Yeah, we used to have that.
We used to have it.
We had that until Clinton.
Until Clinton got rid of it.
Until Clinton got rid of it. It used to be a percentage on every trade.
Right. And...
We're not percentage.
We're not talking about,
but that was enough to stop that kind of crap. Because if I trade 100,000 shares, and I only make $52, but I end up paying $53 in taxes, well, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
But if I don't have to pay anything, and I can do that 80 times a second, I'm going to do it.
Right. Exactly, and it doesn't. That's the whole point. Is it doesn't need to be a big tax. It can be a very tiny tax.
It was like
right?
1.5% or something like that.
I mean, I think you could even go. You could. It wouldn't take very much at all to put all these robo traders out of business.
Yeah.
And all they do is suck the air out of the market. That's
They do.
their only thing, their
That's
only
exactly
function.
it.
And that's not even talking about other problems in the financial services markets, none of which any of the candidates is equipped to solve. There was just this rule change, and I was talking to Sean about this the other night. I think I might have already covered it on the podcast, where the Department of Labor finally issued a ruling that says if you're a retirement plan advisor, you have to be a fiduciary. So you can't screw your clients and say you're giving them advice, right? Mm-hmm. You have to put their interests first,
right.
Which is not to say that you can't make a profit, right? But the way it used to work was if you had 10 different investment options that were defined by your complicit state insurance commission as being, quote, suitable, unquote, you could sell them the most expensive, quote, suitable, unquote, option, right? And then make the biggest possible commission for yourself.
Right.
Right. And they think that you're an advisor because you say you're an advisor, you're paid for advice. But in reality, you're just a salesperson.
You're just a salesman.
Right? And so they don't have their buyer beware guard up
right.
the way they necessarily would. In fact,
right.
most people in polls thought that investment advisors were already fiduciaries.
Oh, yeah.
And
That's
so,
what most people think.
Right. And so the labor law, they changed it to where people...
That isn't law yet, is it?
No. The final ruling said that you're still allowed to swindle clients if it's a non-retirement account. So if it's a non-retirement account, you can still say you're an investment advisor, but not put their interest first. But if it's a retirement account, which is where all of the middle class's money is, then you have to put their interest first. But then they pushed it off for 2 years, the implementation of this rule, and they put some other conditionals in there to make Wall Street happy. So everybody in Wall Street is freaking out about this because it's the death of an entire segment of the industry if the rule ever gets enacted. But it's really all about nothing because the rule flows from the executive branch, and so with any president but Bernie, it'll just get rescinded. Right? They'll just remove the rule, or they'll push it out indefinitely, or they'll modify it in a way that allows people to continue to rip off clients.
Right.
So there's a ton of reforms that we desperately need, and at this point, I don't care anymore if they're immediately practical or not, because the hour is too late. It's too late in the game for incrementalism, right? Which is the entire argument of Hillary supporters, is that incrementalism is the only thing that works. Well, even if that were true, right? First, because Hillary's never been incrementally positive about any of the issues that matter most to me, right? But even if that were true, it's just too late. I was reading that a few months ago that the Antarctic ice shelf is going to drop within the next decade. Sea levels are going to rise by a foot. When that happens, everyone will feel it, right? I mean, we've already come to the point. We've crossed the Rubicon in the sense that very few people actually deny that climate change is happening anymore. They just insist that maybe it's not the fault of humans, or they've come up with new narratives to justify doing nothing, but they no longer deny that it's a real problem.
No, I don't know. I think the leading Republicans still deny it.
Well, they deny that it's the result of human action. They say, oh, well,
Some of them
Earth goes through cycles.
Well, yeah.
In some cycles, everything dies.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. But we could talk about that too, and it really is, in a way, it's exasperating because I can't get that excited about Bernie, just because he's not as left wing as me, but certainly, like I said earlier, he's the only candidate that offers hope, and
What else would you do?
What else would I do?
Yeah.
Well, I think we need to be looking at whenever this concept of capitalism, of rent, right? Whenever you get paid just for having your name on a deed, I think we should really examine that fundamental concept to society, because all of this stems from that, right? Is that I have a pile of money, somebody said it's mine, so I collect interest. for nothing. You know, it's not talking
It
about.
sounds like Islam.
Well, yeah, where it's illegal to,
To charge fees, usury or whatever it is.
and that's another thing too, is that we talk about. This is a change of subject, but you go on TV and you hear about the rise of radical Islam, right, as opposed to benign Islam. Or maybe benign isn't the best possible word, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You know, and absent from, or virtually absent from the conversation is the fact that we are directly to blame for the rise of radical Islam, because radical Islam, Wahhabism, is an invention of the Saudis used to tranquilize their own people and to control their regional power structure, right? And the Saudis, you know, people freak out. If you go on the internet, you'll say, well, these people are crazy. They're chopping off heads. The Saudi Arabians, if you're a 13-year-old and you say, hey, I ought to get to vote, they'll cut your freaking head off, you know? They don't care that you're a child. You question the guardians. That's a death sentence, right? So,
Heresy.
yeah, we sell them weapons. We involve ourselves in their wars at their behest. They've got this regional holy war between them and Iran. And Iran, for all its many faults, there is at least a power structure that derives from voting in Iran. You know, there are clerics, right? But I'd still rather, I mean, remember, the current Iranian government came about because there was a Shah, an inbred tyrant that we supported, and the Iranians said, we don't want to be ruled by some monarch anymore.
So instead, they traded it for.
Well, they traded it for this
Ayatollah.
weird hybrid of an Islamic republic where you have the religious power and you have the political
Yeah,
power.
but the Ayatollah has veto power.
Can essentially veto anything.
Anything.
Yes, it's true. It's true. But the point is,
I don't see how that's
given the
different,
choice
to be
between,
honest.
given the choice between
And they
that,
still have their well, I don't know what they call them. I guess they're called the Republican Guards or whatever they are in Iran. That if you're a protester or whatever it is, you can be arrested.
you can be arrested. You can be
sent to
arrested.
prison with no charges being filed, whatever, except
Oh,
that somebody accused you. Of
Certainly, I'm not saying that Iran is good.
I don't see how it's that much different, to be honest.
So what third party would you trust? You know, the Human Rights Watch consistently puts Saudi Arabia well ahead of Iran in terms of human rights abuses.
Well, that's probably
you know, in terms of the representative, in terms of the ability of citizens to participate in the decisions of their government.
This probably is not going to be on the podcast, right?
I don't know. I think it's good, and we just ramble on the podcast, but whatever.
I thought they were half an hour long.
No, they're usually more like an hour nowadays because I can't get people to shut up.
Who doesn't?
Dad's like, I'm tired of talking. Shut up, son. But so anyway, you know, and let's get down to two. Remember 9/11, 15 of the hijackers. 16.
I think it was 16.
Were Saudi.
16 of the 19.
Osama bin Laden was Saudi. All the money came from the Saudi royal family that funded it, right? And so, did the Saudi government attack us? No, but their crazy version of Islam, that they've done everything they can to propagate as a very cynical play to shore up their own autocratic power.
Well, they're still in a sense in the Middle Ages where the king derived his power from the church. The church and them were in collusion, right? The church is the one that crowned the king, and the king then, if you disagreed with the king, you were a heretic. You know.
So anyway,
it's the same kind of it's feudalism.
Getting back to what I would do different. How am I to the left of Bernie Sanders? I would re-examine I would be much more skeptical of extracting rent. You know, not rent in the sense of paying for housing, but rent in the sense of, you know, money that you get for no input of labor on your behalf, right? Money that you get because your name is on a deed. I think, not that we should do away with it, but that we should examine it carefully and decide whether it's in each instance working to the social good or not. Because there's definitely people extracting rent from blind trusts how should that even be legal, right?
Why not?
What does it benefit? Well, why not? I mean, what kind of a society we want to have. Do we want to have a society where rich people can hide all their money in blind trusts and commit crimes and pretend they have no knowledge and profit from them anyway?
Yeah,
do we
they're
want
called politicians.
Well,
Well,
but do we want that? Do we want that? Is my point. And I talk about, in terms of foreign policy, I'm not as dovish as some people, but I think why do we have an embargo with Cuba, but we don't have an embargo with Saudi Arabia? I mean, Saudi Arabia is using cluster bombs. This was a big issue here in Rhode Island too.
You mean in Yemen?
Yeah, they're using cluster bombs in Yemen, whose use in civilian centers is considered a war crime.
Yeah.
But Saudi Arabia is doing it anyway because, of course, what's one little war crime in the name of our regional
if
dominance?
Assad did it, then we would be
Right.
okay. Then that would be bad.
That would be bad, right?
Right.
But and here in Rhode Island is where they're made, right?
Is that right?
At Textron, yeah.
Oh well, then you can't stop that from happening.
So there's been this big protest, but of course you can't stop that from happening.
No,
and then we
that
have
means
even
jobs, man.
right, even on climate change. We have our guy Sheldon Whitehouse, who's supposed to be this climate champion in the Senate. And I keep meaning to write a letter to the editor about this.
It's marketing, Grant. Marketing.
It is. It's just marketing. When I went to his fundraiser, I paid $60 to be there, and that was just to be there.
Yeah. Well, it could be worse. You could have gone to the Clooney
The Clooney Clinton fundraiser. That's true.
and paid what was it?
300,000.
350,000 to go.
Yeah. Well, we got to beat Bernie somehow, right? But
Right.
but so I went
Even
to
though we like
Sheldon's.
Bernie, because George Clooney likes Bernie.
I went to Sheldon's fundraiser, and it was cool. He had all this. He had this like seafood chowder and all these meals,
Good-
and
good
it was nice.
food, huh?
Yeah, it's good food. But the beer wasn't included. You had to buy the beer separately. Well, the beer was served in plastic cups.
Yeah.
And there was no place to recycle plastic cups. Now, to my way of thinking, if you're supposed to be an environmental champion and you're doing a $60 plate fundraiser, what would it really cost you to put a separate bin that says recycle cups here, right? I don't think
wow.
very little.
Boy, this would be
very
good.
much.
If I was in Portland.
Oh, and we should talk about Portland too, but we're coming up on an hour here, so we'll see if we get to
Our
it.
Senator Merkley,
Yeah?
he supports Bernie, and they're having a rally, and that Representative Tulsi Gabbard, I think she's the one from Hawaii.
Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard, Hawaii.
Yeah, and Merkley, our senator, are having a rally on tomorrow.
Well, I think it's pretty
They're
clear.
having one in Portland, one in Eugene, and one in Salem.
One in Salem, huh?
Uh-huh.
Wow, I didn't know there were enough
I'll be on an airplane.
enough
but-
voters in Salem to justify it. But I guess if you're
How
going
many
to
cities are there that you're going to go
I
to?
guess if you're going to Eugene from Portland, you may as well stop in Salem.
But the thing is he's our senator. Merkley's
Jeff
our
Merkley?
senator.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
He's a Bernie supporter.
Well,
He's one of those super delegates, that 36 or whatever it is, that actually are going to support Bernie,
right. The handful of supers that are willing to support Bernie.
along with Tulsi Gabbard too.
But what was I going to say before you so rudely interrupted me and
interrupted
distracted
you?
me from my point? I forget. Let's talk about Portland too, because Portland is interesting. Because in Portland, it's gentrification on this mass, extremely rapid scale.
Well, that's one way to look at it. But like we were having this discussion yesterday, and why are houses so much cheaper in like the South, like Florida or Georgia, than they are in, say, Portland?
Okay.
In Oregon, Oregon in general, whether it's Salem or Eugene or whatever. And I think, of course, this is because I was a planner, maybe, but I think part of the problem is we have a pretty stringent land use planning environment in Oregon. You can expand into the urban growth boundaries, and that's it. You can't just go out like in Florida. Hell, they just go out in the middle of the swamp and bulldoze the trees down and make a lake and build houses, and they're doing that constantly.
Yep.
Every day, hundreds of houses being built. So the price of housing is not high because there's lots and lots of supply. Same thing in Georgia. Around Atlanta, I don't know what the area is of their suburbs, but it's like 50 miles in every direction is like tract after tract, suburb after suburb. They're little towns, but the little towns are just, they have a town center that's more or less decaying, but they're surrounded by housing projects, right? I'm talking about single family housing and stuff like that, as well as apartments and stuff too. But in Oregon, you don't have that because we've said we've decided, and we have what we call urban growth boundaries. And you can't build outside of the urban growth boundaries unless you have like 80 acres and you can build a farm on it, farmhouse on it. You just can't do it. And the urban growth boundaries are supposed to be defined by how far out we can go and meet the demands for our population growth for the next 20 years. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's data about the future. How do we do that?
Well, we guess.
We guess.
Yeah.
Right. Well, right now, and for the last several years, Oregon has experienced a great deal of influx.
Yeah.
Lots of people moving in. Well, there's no place for them to live because the urban growth boundaries and stuff like that are established, and they're not building new houses. I mean, they are, but they're not building them in sufficient numbers. They're not building new apartment buildings in sufficient numbers to handle the increase in population. I don't think they expected there to be that kind of an increase or influx of people. I mean, they thought, okay, every Oregonian is going to have 2 kids, and that's how or 3 kids, and that's how we're going to grow. But instead, we have people moving in because it's a nice place to live. But there's no supply, and that you call it gentrification. I call that inadequate planning, maybe.
Well, I mean, we could probably devote a whole podcast, honestly, to analyzing the Portland housing crisis. And there are people I know that live in Portland that are much more active in that, so I'd love to have them on. But yeah, I think what I'm getting at is
it's not
clearly
just Portland though. Salem's housing is twice as high as it is in Georgia. Eugene's is probably more than twice as high. The housing is unbelievable.
Yeah, but how about you? You live in the middle of nowhere, and your housing values haven't gone up in.
No, they haven't.
An age of
but
the
I
earth.
can't do much with my property because it's zoned so that I can't build more houses on it or something like that.
We should get it rezoned. Aren't you on the planning commission?
And not anymore. I retired from the planning commission.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they gave me a nice little plaque. I'm retired.
Oh, and so I wanted to finish my thought about
But
Sheldon Whitehouse.
the laws are defined. I mean, you meet certain criteria, you can build. You don't meet that criteria, so bad.
Well, it would be interesting to see what the solution is to that, because I think that I would like to see more urban areas with high rises that can store a bunch of people. But it seems like developers, if given a choice, will always prefer to build sprawling streets that go in curvy lines.
Right.
In suburban areas.
Well, those are probably more
cheap
saleable.
prefab houses.
They're more saleable, and they probably have less capital requirements in the beginning.
Well, I'm sure that's true, but
So why wouldn't you?
True.
I'm a developer. I got this much money. I can make this more money. Probably, well, it might be over a longer period of time. If I develop another housing development with
Sure.
curvy streets and multiple.
well, maybe we should base the good of our society based on something more than what's going to be most profitable to developers who are going to build a project and then immediately sell it so they can build another one somewhere else and have no interest in the long-term viability of that project.
I don't know if I go that far.
But how far would you go?
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I with the way it is now. There might be some things you could. I don't know.
And so, getting back to my final thought, and I'll leave you with this unless you want to add something, and then I'll let you have the last word. But so Sheldon Whitehouse,
You're gonna let me have the last word?
Dad is pretending to have a heart attack right now. He's playing being shocked. At least I hope he's pretending. Although on the other hand, saying if he does have a heart attack, I get 1/5 of his money, so might not be so bad, right? I guess I win either way. So anyway, so there's a natural gas plant that they want to build up in Burrillville. Actually, they've already built this compressor station.
Yeah, and that
I'm gonna build-
liquefied natural gas.
Well, the liquefied natural gas plant is different. They want to put that in Providence.
Yeah.
And of course, they're going to put it in the poorest neighborhood ever because those people don't have any political power. And so the local pollution from the plant won't affect anybody that matters.
There's not a lot of pollution from liquefied natural gas.
Oh, there's not a lot.
No,
but
there isn't.
the south side of Providence already has significantly higher levels of asthma and other pollutants than the rest of the city. I don't think we need a natural gas facility there, but be that as it may.
But they don't burn natural gas. They have to use. They have compressors.
They have compressors.
Right. And I don't know what the compressors.
And also, this is funny. You can see on YouTube they've got people recording the sound that the compressor station makes in Burrillville. It is screaming loud for a mile. So God help you if you live a mile and a half away from the compressor station.
Well,
right?
You can compensate for that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean that's their plan is they bought off all the people that were right next to the property so that those people have been paid for.
Right.
But
and then
people
you build
on
walls and baffles. And
people on the fringe, yeah, but they don't want to do any of that stuff.
Well, then they shouldn't be allowed to build there.
Well, they shouldn't, but
But I don't think that's.
the governor.
I don't think pollution, other than maybe noise pollution, but I don't think pollution is a big factor. How is it a big factor?
How is it a big factor? I mean, to say nothing of methane leaks, which
Well, there are methane leaks, yeah.
yeah. Here's an example.
I'm assuming that there will be. There doesn't have to be methane leaks.
No, but there will be because they build the plant as cheaply as possible.
Well, you don't know that.
I read an expose just the other day about the inspectors who inspect the pipeline, and the company will notify them after the pipe's already been buried that they've completed the pipe, and so that the inspectors can inspect it. But the pipe's already been buried, and they're saying increasingly.
Yeah, but you can test for leaks anyhow.
This is
You
in the wake of
pressurize
this
it.
huge explosion in Pennsylvania that
Right.
happened the last couple of days.
Yeah, but
'Cause
that
the
was an old line or something, wasn't it?
Well, the inspectors have been saying we've been trying to sound the
Been
alarm
trying
on this
for
on
that
the
for a
new
long
lines
time.
for a long time,
Long time.
and nobody cares.
It's kind of like Flint.
Right,
Water.
right. I mean, everybody should have known, but nobody cared because
Well-
the people drinking the water were
Right.
expendable, essentially.
Well, I don't know. It's because nobody cared.
Nobody cared. Yeah.
It's not that the people were expendable; they just didn't have any political clout.
Well, remember too that they had been systematically deprived of any representative government over
That's
a number
true.
of years.
I think that was the biggest factor.
They
They took over their government. They took over their representative.
Yeah, and right now
Only in Michigan can you have that.
we have Sheldon Whitehouse who refuses to take a position on any natural gas, any facilities in the state. He says, "Well, I'm not concerned about how dirty my state gets. I'm concerned with loftier matters on the federal level, right?"
Well, I just don't see that a liquefied natural gas place is that dirty.
Well, I think that you're
What are they going to do with the gas after it's liquefied? Ship it off?
probably ship it off. Yeah, that's why they want to build it on a port.
Yeah.
But I think that ultimately the question. This is all
So
fracked. This is all
shale
fracked gas, by the
Right,
way.
right.
And the question
Well-
is, look, are we going to leave anything in the ground, even now in Rhode Island, where
I
our
don't
oceans are rising, or are we going to burn it all and then
Well,
just build?
liquefied-
Let's just build a seawall around Martha's Vineyard. That'll solve the problem.
That doesn't matter for this.
So anyway, we can't even get our own
But see,
senator to care about environmental problems in our
I
own
have
state.
a whole different, maybe, approach to that. First of all, if everybody that uses coal and gasoline, for that matter, would convert to natural gas, we'd probably solve about half of the problem.
You say that, but methane leaks are a significant
sure.
problem.
Sure, but methane leaks go away.
Right. I mean, in 10 years, the
Yeah.
impact of methane doesn't stay in the environment
Does
forever
not.
the way
Like
carbon does. But, that's like saying I'll be dead in 10 years, so what do I care? Right? Like,
Well, that is true.
the next 10 years, the next 10 years are going to be a big deal. And like I said, in Rhode Island, we're all coast.
I would not.
The entire state's
Here,
within
you
a few
know,
hundred
here-
feet of sea level.
Here's what I say. I would not. I mean, like for example, I really think they really need to reinstate tax credits for. Like I can't get a tax credit when I buy a Camry hybrid because they've sold more than 50,000 of them, and now
Right.
they sell 50,000.
There's no more tax credit. Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Well, of course it's ridiculous, but
They
you
should
know.
reinstate that. That would make a difference. And all electric cars should get a big tax credit. All right. And if they just converted, like I said, a fraction of what we burn now from coal to natural gas, it would make a significant difference.
I don't think it would. I think
definitely would.
the evidence is mounting that natural gas. It's one of those things where there's so much being leaked at various points in the production chain.
Where?
Like I saw anywhere where there's natural gas production. I was reading a few years
You
ago.
want to
I think it
like
was
the one out in Porter Ranch in California where it blew up?
Yeah, and
it's
it's
been
like
going for 200 days or something.
yeah, and it's like this tremendous disaster. And there's all of these there's these wells where the last little bit of gas wasn't worth extracting, so they just capped it in the most cheap and short-term way possible in, I think it was in Arizona or Utah I was watching. It's one of those southwestern states. And they're talking about how the inspectors will go around and these plugs are leaking like
I have
sieves.
some news
And the
for you.
people,
I have some news for you. Coal mines, in addition to the fact that coal is carbon, right? And sulfur, so all those things are pollutions that go up into the air. Coal mines produce an enormous amount of methane gas.
They do.
That just
Yep.
gets vented out into the
just gets
atmosphere.
vented. Yes.
If we shut down all the coal mines,
We should shut down all the coal mines, but we can't even get Congress to talk about that. All they ever want to talk about with coal is we're going to get clean coal. Like you can, right?
yeah, no, there is no such thing.
There's no such thing as clean coal. But you know, that's I guess the overarching point is that we are so far away from where we need to be by any measure.
Yeah, but I think if we could convert a big part of our infrastructure to natural gas, it would
And I
still
think-
make a significant difference.
I think we should just skip the natural gas expansion and just build more windmills and solar.
Well, no, I'm not opposed to that.
You
too.
know, you can put, I mean, this house that we're in right now, there's no trees that would cover, or there's
I
like
couldn't
one that
believe
could be
it.
cut.
I was in England and there was a bunch of many houses had solar panels.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, why the hell would you put a solar panel here? The sun only shines there like 50 days a year.
Because it doesn't need to shine as often as you might think. You know, it makes a big difference.
In the wintertime, it doesn't shine at all. I mean, you know, because it's further north.
Well, like I said, you'd be surprised how little you don't need. It's not solar of a previous era where it has to be in a place that's going to get sunlight all the time. And then, you know,
No, but it certainly helps.
you'll never do away with
It's a lot better.
on-demand power systems, but
That's what those are ones should be methane.
well, I think that there might be a role for that as on-demand, but I don't
As
think we should be
opposed to coal.
instead of expanding that, instead of spending government money expanding that, we should focus on refurbishing the ones we have so they leak less. And we should massively
Yeah, that would work
expand
too.
massively
I'm not
expand
opposed
the
to
other
that.
end of the spectrum, which is the cars, which is the rooftop solar, you know, other grid living. And honestly, why would and whenever you get into any of these, you're talking about putting whole companies out of business. I mean, National Grid, it's not even an American company, right, that services all of New England for their energy needs.
Why is
Like
it called National Grid?
I don't know, because
It's not national.
It's not national at all. They're Brits, right? But they're not even an American company, and yet they control all the energy systems in Rhode Island, right? And
Oh, that's for me. Probably Gary. He wants to talk to me some more. Well, maybe no. Wasn't that my phone ringing?
it was your phone ringing. Well, you can call him back in a second because I'm almost done here.
Okay. All right.
So they control it all, and of course they're going to fight you tooth and nail for any expansion of solar credits or wind credits or anything else. The only wind a few years ago they said, well, we're going to do this deep water wind project
Yeah, I
because there are tremendously valuable places like some of the prime real estate for shallow water wind is in this region.
Right.
Right. But the rich people on Martha's Vineyard couldn't have that, because if there's a windmill a mile and a half off, it might look bad. Right.
Yeah.
So National Grid said, hey, we've got this great plan. We're going to raise everybody's rates by a quarter and by 25%. And also we're going to like build 2 windmills out in deep water as an experiment. Right. And so they got all sorts of agog, and like even environmental people who should have known better were getting on board with this. I'm like, we don't need deep water wind. We need shallow water wind, because shallow water wind is proven technology, and we have some of the greatest regions on Earth for shallow water wind, right? We have places where those windmills would be going 300 days out of the year or more. You know, they'd be generating power. And we could do it with proven off-the-shelf technology, but oh no, can't do that, because the only reason National Grid would ever support a windmill is if they could use this as an excuse for yet another rate hike, which is exactly what happened, you know?
Why is that a rate hike?
They said, we're going to raise your rates by 25%, and also we're going to build this. And I know about all this because
Yeah, I know.
we knew a guy that was with a big employer. I think it was Torrey Plastics, right? And they use a lot of power. And they said, if they had been considering expansion, because they located where they were because they get all these fresh chemical engineers out of URI, right? And so they located where they were because of the intellectual draw of the state, the human capital.
Right.
But if they were considering expansion, but now with energy costs being so high, they're not going to be expanding. They're
should
looking
move
for
to
ways
Oregon.
to shutter. Right. They're looking for ways to go back to Japan.
Because Oregon, that's why there used to be tons of aluminum factories along the Columbia River. Because they got power from the
From the dam.
Bonneville Power
Yep.
Dam,
Yep.
the Dalles and all that stuff. And it's dirt cheap, and
Yeah.
it still is, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
But then, what put the aluminum companies out of business? They're all out of business now
Well, I think
because they were refining from bauxite.
I was going to say, like, I
and
think
it might be
bauxite.
recycling part of it. or
Yeah, I
something
think
like that, pollution.
that's another thing. Bauxite, it's very pollutant.
Yeah.
When you, any ore refining is going to have pollution.
Right.
And then on top of that, here in Rhode Island, they don't even recycle cans in Rhode Island. They have a recycle bin, but they don't have a deposit program.
Right.
I don't know why we don't have a deposit program.
Many. The only states that do it. Gee, you look at a bottle in Oregon.
Right.
There's only like 7 or
5
8.
states that don't get with the program, and Rhode Island's one. We can't even have a 5-cent deposit.
No. There's only like, I don't think there's 10 even states that actually give a deposit.
Well, I think there's more than 10. Yeah, I think so.
No. And in California, it's not even a deposit.
No, it's
some
this whole bizarre
thing because they didn't want to put a deposit on. You take it back to some other place and they'll
Right.
give you 40 cents a ton or something.
Meanwhile, on the other hand, the Rhode Island landfill, there's 11 years left until the Rhode Island landfill is done. It's full. There's no possibility of expansion. That site can't be expanded. So we need to either build a new site somewhere, right? Ship all the garbage out of state. Our state has no plan whatsoever.
I'm gonna go ahead and call.
Yeah, but I think we're
You
done
probably
here.
need
So
to go to bed anyhow.
well, my schedule is all messed up. But anyway, so thank you all for listening to the Grim Wisdom podcast. Maybe a little more disjointed than you're used to. Some family drama for you to enjoy. And we'll see you next week with Sam Bell.